As the corporate SUV turned onto Sycamore Street, the bright red "Sold" sign staked into my lawn felt like a slap. Leaning against her car, my sister Tessa smirked, arms crossed. "Shouldn't have stayed away so long," she said. I set down my suitcase, noted the new lock, and allowed a small, tight smile. They thought they'd taken my house. They didn't know my job is risk control, and this would be my final cleanup project. Family. I am Rowan Blake, 32 years old, and the recycled air of the cabin still clung to my clothes as the car moved through the late afternoon haze. I had just landed from Halcyon Bay, closing a 10-day negotiation that had secured a critical data infrastructure deal for Ashridge Analytics. The trip had been a marathon of sterile boardrooms, time zone-induced fatigue, and the quiet, immense satisfaction of a meticulously executed strategy. I'd felt the familiar decompression on the flight home, the mental transition from corporate battleground to personal sanctuary. The house in Westbrook Ridge was the prize I'd bought myself after the last promotion. A clean, modern structure of glass and cedar, a testament to order and control. It was more than a house. It was the physical manifestation of a life built on precision, a fortress against the chaos I managed for a living. The driver, a silent man named Arthur I'd used for years, navigated the familiar tree-lined streets with practiced ease. But as we made the final turn onto my block, a discordant note broke the harmony: the manicured lawns, the uniform mailboxes, the quiet rhythm of the neighborhood. It was all disrupted by the scene waiting for me. The grass on my property, new sod that had been my first major decision as a homeowner, was a mess of trampled green, marred by the careless footprints of strangers. And there, planted dead center in that violated lawn, was the sign. It wasn't just the stark, aggressive red of the "Sold" placard that seized my attention, but the audacity of its placement, angled toward the street like a declaration of war. My fortress had been breached. The front door, a heavy oak panel I'd chosen for its sense of permanence, looked wrong. The brushed nickel of the handle was gone, replaced by a cheap, garish brass lock set. Scratches marred the wood around it, the telltale signs of a hurried, forceful installation. This wasn't a renovation, it was an eviction. Tessa was there, of course. She was leaning against the fender of her pristine white convertible, an accessory to the scene she had so clearly orchestrated. My younger sister. She wore oversized designer sunglasses that hid her eyes, but not the triumphant curl of her lips. Her arms were crossed over a silk blouse that probably cost more than my first car. She looked like she was posing for a magazine spread about effortless wealth, the kind you inherit, not earn. She pushed the sunglasses up her nose, a deliberate, theatrical gesture. "The bank approved it," she announced, her voice light, casual, as if discussing the weather. "They had to sell. You were late on the first payment. Rowan?" The words were a payload of disinformation, designed to trigger panic and confusion. For a fraction of a second, the human part of me, the older sister, felt a cold knot of dread. A missed payment? Impossible. But the professional in me took over before the feeling could take root. My training is in identifying anomalies, in separating signal from noise. Tessa's statement was pure noise. My payments were automated, an electronic handshake between my primary account and the mortgage lender that occurred on the first of every month. Without fail, I had the digital receipts, the transaction logs, the entire data trail confirming my compliance. Her lie wasn't a mistake. It was an opening salvo. It was the formal initiation of hostilities. I remained still, my face a carefully composed mask of neutrality. In a crisis, the first one to show emotion loses leverage. My heart rate, which had spiked for a brief moment, settled into its resting rhythm. My breathing was even. I was no longer a sister coming home. I was a risk manager assessing a critical incident. The suburban theater was in full swing. To my left, I saw the curtains twitch in Mrs. Gable's window. Across the street, Mr. Henderson, who was usually out watering his prize-winning roses at this hour, was conspicuously absent, though I could see his silhouette behind the screen of his front door. They were watching the drama unfold, this unwelcome disruption in the carefully curated piece of Westbrook Ridge. Adding to the spectacle was a large, slightly battered-looking box truck parked clumsily at the end of my driveway, partially blocking the sidewalk. The faded logo on its side read, White Oak Realty. It was another piece of the stagecraft, another prop in Tessa's production. A young man in a wrinkled suit, looking barely out of college, detached himself from the truck and walked toward me with an awkward gait. He was holding a thin manila envelope. He avoided my eyes, focusing instead on a point somewhere over my left shoulder. He was a pawn, and he knew it. "Miss Blake," he began, his voice cracking slightly. He didn't wait for a confirmation. "This is the official handover notice. The property has been transferred to the new owner." He thrust the envelope at me. I took it. The paper felt cheap. The documents inside were hastily printed, the ink still slightly damp. My name, on the top line of the official-looking form, was misspelled. Rowan Blake, an amateurish error, a detail. I logged it mentally. Haste, lack of professionalism, a disregard for accuracy. These were vulnerabilities. Tessa watched me, her smirk unwavering. She expected a reaction. Tears, shouting, a frantic, undignified scene on the lawn for the neighbors to gossip about. She had always thrived on my composure cracking, on finding the flaw in my carefully constructed world. Instead of looking at the papers, I took out my phone. My movements were deliberate, economical. I walked to the front door, ignoring the young realtor who was now shuffling his feet, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. I angled the phone's camera, first capturing a wide shot of the new lock and the damaged door frame. Then I moved in closer, using the flash to illuminate the fine print. I took a high-resolution photograph of the lock's serial number. I took another of the small, adhesive seal from the locksmith company. Rapid bolt security, stuck just above the deadbolt. These weren't just pictures. They were exhibits, time-stamped, geolocated evidence, small details that could unravel a conspiracy. "What are you doing?" Tessa's voice had lost its breezy confidence, replaced by a sharp edge of irritation. She hadn't anticipated this calm, methodical response. I turned to face her, my phone still in my hand, documenting the unauthorized modification of my property. "Don't make a scene, Rowan," she muttered, her voice low enough that the realtor couldn't hear. The mask of the carefree sister was slipping, revealing the bitter resentment beneath. "You're going to embarrass yourself. You have a reputation. What will people at your company think?" That was her leverage, the weapon she always tried to use against me. Social shame, the fear of professional fallout. She saw my career not as an achievement, but as a pressure point. I allowed myself the smallest of smiles, the one I reserved for confirming a critical vulnerability in a hostile system. "That's what you were hoping for, isn't it?" Her face tightened. The shot had landed exactly as intended. I didn't give her time to recover. There was nothing more to be gained from this location. The scene had been documented, the initial threat identified. Now it was time to move to the response phase. I turned my back on her, on the house, on the gawking neighbors. I walked to my suitcase, the one I had placed on the sidewalk what felt like an eternity ago. I extended the handle. The click of the mechanism was loud in the sudden silence. Without another glance at my sister, I began to walk down the street, the suitcase wheels making a steady, rhythmic thrum against the concrete. It was the only sound. I pulled my phone from my pocket again, my thumb already dialing a preset number. It was a direct line to my internal crisis response team at Ashridge, a small, elite unit of data analysts and forensic specialists I had built myself. They were the best. The call connected on the first ring. "It's Blake," I said, my voice crisp and devoid of emotion. I kept walking, my pace steady. "Open a new incident file. Designation, Westbrook." There was a pause, then the voice of my lead analyst, David, came through, calm and professional. "Confirmed. Rowan, incident file. Westbrook is open, standing by for initial data upload and briefing." "Data incoming in 5, I said. Preliminary assessment suggests a fraudulent conveyance of real property executed through compromised credentials and social engineering. Multiple hostile actors involved. Understood. We're on it. I hung up. As I reached the end of the block, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The entire event was already restructuring itself in my mind, shifting from a chaotic, personal betrayal into a structured problem set. A complex risk map began to materialize, a clear, logical flowchart of interconnected nodes. At the top was the triggering event, the fraudulent sale. Branching off from it were the entities involved. Node 1, the bank. Its security protocols for authorizing account changes clearly compromised. Node 2, White Oak Realty, the facilitator, whose hasty paperwork and misspelled name pointed to either gross incompetence or active complicity. Node 3, Rapid Bolt Security, the locksmith, a third-party vendor whose work order would provide a crucial paper trail. Node 4, the mysterious new owner, hidden behind a notice of transfer. And there, at the very center of the map, connecting all the lines of attack, was the central node, the primary threat actor, the point of origin from which the entire infection had spread. Tessa. She wasn't just my sister anymore. She was a key variable in a complex security breach, and I was about to run a full diagnostic. A sterile hotel room downtown served as my temporary command center. The anonymous beige walls and the low hum of the air conditioning were a comfort. A blank canvas on which I could project the architecture of my problem. My laptop was open. The secure portal to my team already active. They were moving, collating the initial data I'd sent. But I needed the backstory. In my line of work, the technical data, the IP logs, the transaction IDs, only tells you how. The human element, the history of grievances and motivations, tells you why. And the why is where the true vulnerabilities lie. My family, as a concept, fractured the day my father's heart gave out on the 17th hole of the Stoneford Country Club golf course. He was a quiet, steady man, an engineer who believed in blueprints and stress tolerances. I inherited his disposition for logic. His death left a vacuum that my mother, Sandra, abhorred. She was a woman who needed structure, and within a year, she found it by marrying that structure's most obvious incarnation. A lawyer. Richard Pike was his name, a man whose professional life was built on boilerplate contracts and the art of the settlement. He moved us into his sprawling colonial in Stoneford, and with him came a new, unspoken set of bylaws for our family. Central to this new regime was a locked mahogany box where my mother kept what she called the family papers, birth certificates, old photos, my father's will, and, increasingly, documents I never saw, related to Richard's estate and their shared finances. The box was a black hole of information, a physical manifestation of the family's new, opaque operating system. Access was granted, not earned, and I was never on the approved list. Tessa, on the other hand, became the system's chief administrator. Our family mythos painted her as the one who is good at organizing things. She planned the holiday gatherings, managed the family group chat, and always knew who was feuding with whom. It was a carefully cultivated image. In reality, Tessa didn't organize events. She organized people. She was a human intelligence operative, gathering snippets of information, a passing complaint, a financial worry, a private hope, and storing them for later use. She could weaponize a secret with the casual grace of a sommelier recommending a wine. Our chosen paths after college were telling. I went into finance, a world of hard numbers, audited statements, and quantifiable risk. I learned to build systems that were resilient to human error and malice. Tessa majored in event management, a field that seemed to be primarily concerned with aesthetics and perception. She learned how to create flawless surfaces that concealed messy realities. Her skill set was perfectly suited to our new family dynamic. Every dinner became a carefully managed event, and my life was often the main attraction. She would casually inquire about my work deadlines in front of Richard, or my dating life in front of my gossiping aunt, all under the guise of sisterly interest. Each question was a public probe, designed to extract information and gauge my reactions for the benefit of her audience. The power of attorney was the culmination of her art. It happened last year. I was in the middle of refinancing my condo, a complex process I was managing myself. My mother called, her voice thick with manufactured anxiety. There was a leak in her roof, she claimed, and the contractor needed access to a specific utility line that ran along the edge of my property line at the time. She said she needed a temporary power of attorney, just to sign the work order if I was unavailable. It will make things so much easier. Rowan, just for the house stuff. Richard, in the background, added his legal weight, assuring me it was a standard neighborly formality. I knew it wasn't. A simple notarized letter of permission would have sufficed. A power of attorney was a significant legal tool, but arguing would have triggered a full-scale family drama, with me cast as the cold, untrusting daughter. So I agreed. But on my terms, I drafted the document myself. It was not a general power of attorney. It was a limited, specific instrument. It granted my mother the power to act only in matters related to the shared utility line and explicitly excluded any and all financial transactions, property transfers, or credit inquiries. It had a 90-day expiration clause. I had her sign my copy in front of a notary I chose, and I filed it away. The incident was a red flag, a near miss I documented in my personal risk ledger. My caution proved prescient. A few months later, I discovered Tessa had used a different, more vaguely worded POA she'd convinced our mother to sign years ago to withdraw a substantial amount from Sandra's personal savings account. The official story was that it was to pay for an emergency kitchen repair. When the contractor's final bill came in much lower, Tessa claimed he had overcharged and then given a refund in cash, which she'd put back. The money never reappeared. My mother, when I gently questioned the logic, fell back on the family's prime directive. "Oh, Rowan, don't be so cynical. Families are supposed to trust each other." I remember the moment clearly. We were in her perfectly appointed living room, surrounded by portraits of a smiling, happy family. As she spoke those words, I made a mental note, translating her sentiment into my own language. Risk identified, threat actor, internal, motivation, financial gain, enabling factor, willful ignorance of senior management, control measures, insufficient. It was then I decided that any significant asset I acquired would have to be insulated from this chaotic, insecure network she called family. When I decided to buy the house in Westbrook Ridge, I built my fortress before the first foundation was even poured. The bulk of my liquid assets, including the entire down payment, was not held in a standard savings account. It was in the Bluefinch Trust, an irrevocable trust I had established 2 years prior. I was the grantor, but the trust itself was a separate legal entity, managed by a third-party trustee with strict instructions that I had written myself. It was a black box by design. My family knew I had investments, but they didn't know the structure. They couldn't. Tessa hated it. She was good at rifling through a purse or glancing at an open bank statement on a laptop screen. She was not good at reading 100 pages of dense legal trust documentation. She had once tried to ask about my portfolio, and I simply said, "It's managed through Bluefinch." The name was a dead end. A smooth, featureless wall she couldn't climb. Her inability to access, to quantify. My financial world was a constant source of irritation for her. It was the one part of my life she could not organize. So I moved the funds for the house from the trust, but I made a deliberate, strategic decision. I kept the title of the house itself in my individual name, on paper, to the county clerk and the tax assessor. The owner was Rowan Blake. This was the vulnerability I left exposed. It was bait. My 10-day business trip to Halcyon Bay was not just a business trip, it was a penetration test. I was creating a vacuum, a period of absence and perceived distraction. To my family, my focus would be thousands of miles away, on complex negotiations. They would see an opportunity, a window where the systems administrator was offline. For Tessa, who saw my independence as a personal affront and my assets as a communal resource she was unfairly denied access to. This window was an invitation. For me, it was a honeypot. I had laid the trap, and I was waiting to see what vermin it would attract. I never told them what I really do. They thought my job as head of risk control at Ashridge Analytics was some boring corporate compliance role, checking boxes and making sure the company filed its paperwork on time. They had no concept of the reality. Companies don't hire me to check boxes. They hire me to think like a criminal. They pay me to see the invisible flaws in their systems, to find the gaps in their security, the backdoors in their code, and the disgruntled employee in accounting who is about to walk out the door with a database of all their clients. I teach global corporations how to seal the very same loopholes that my sister, with her petty ambitions and her event planner smile, had just tried to crawl through. She was a case study in insider threat, and class was about to begin. The hotel room was my clean room, an environment scrubbed of emotion and distraction. Outside, the city hummed with a life I was detached from. Inside, there was only the glow of my laptop screen and the cold, hard logic of the data stream. My team had already populated a secure server with the initial files from my bank, the realty company's public records, and the corporate details of the locksmith. It was time to follow the trail. My first step was to access my own financial dashboard, the same one I review weekly from anywhere in the world. As expected, a glaring red notification banner pulsed at the top of the screen for my mortgage account. Payment overdue. 30 days. It was a digital fiction, but a potent one. A 30-day delinquency is a material breach, the standard trigger for a lender to initiate foreclosure proceedings. This was the foundational lie upon which their entire strategy was built. It was, of course, impossible. I clicked into the transaction history. There it was, the log for the first of the month, the scheduled date for the automated payment. The entry read, "Auto payment failed. Insufficient funds." Another lie. I ran a parallel query on my primary checking account. The funds were not only sufficient, they were sitting there, untouched. The system had attempted the debit, recorded a failure, and sent an alert, but the money never moved. This wasn't a failure. It was a block. I bypassed the consumer-facing interface and used my credentials to access the back-end data portal, the kind of detailed transaction ledger that bank employees see. I needed to see the raw data, not the simplified summary. I cross-referenced the transaction ID against the automated clearinghouse, ACH, network logs, and the Swift messaging system records. Banks use these networks to talk to each other, sending secure instructions for transferring funds. My auto payment was a simple, recurring ACH instruction. The digital breadcrumbs told the real story. The instruction to pull funds from my checking account had been modified 7 days before the due date. The destination account was no longer the mortgage lender. The funds were rerouted to a newly added, linked external account. The transfer had failed not because of insufficient funds, but because my own security protocols flagged a transfer to a new, unverified beneficiary for such a large sum and automatically froze it. The system worked, but the attempt was the key. They hadn't needed to steal the money, just to make it look like it never arrived at its intended destination. The next query was obvious. Who added the new account? I pulled the account change history. There it was, logged and timestamped. A new external account, held at a small, regional credit union, had been added to my profile 6 days before my flight to Halcyon Bay. The authorization for this change required two-factor authentication. A code had been sent to the primary email address on file. And there was the vector of attack. The email listed was not my current, encrypted work address or my secure personal one. It was an old family account from a generic webmail provider. blakefamilycircle@email.com. It was an account my mother had set up years ago for sharing photos and planning holidays. An account I hadn't logged into in a decade. An account that Tessa, as the family's self-appointed organizer, still managed and had the password to. She had used a legacy vulnerability, a forgotten backdoor I had failed to seal. It was a rookie mistake on my part, and I felt a flicker of professional annoyance at my own oversight. With the digital intrusion confirmed, I moved on to the physical paperwork. My team had managed to get a scanned copy of the change of address and default notification that had supposedly been sent to me from a contact inside the bank's compliance department. It was the legal document justifying the default. It was addressed to my old condo, not the new house, ensuring I would never receive it, and at the bottom was the signature, Rowan B. I zoomed in on the image until the pixels blurred. It was perfect, too perfect. The pressure was uniform, the lines unnaturally smooth. There were none of the subtle variations in ink flow and pressure that characterize a human signature. This wasn't written. It was rendered. It was a high-quality scan of my signature, likely lifted from one of the 100 documents I'd signed over the years, which had been digitally converted into a vector image and printed onto the form using a high-resolution printer. It was a clean, sterile forgery, the kind that would pass a cursory glance but would fall apart under any real forensic analysis. Next, the players. I opened the file on White Oak Realty. They were a small, local firm with a string of mediocre reviews. Their digital footprint was minimal, but my team had found something interesting in the local business filings. They had invoiced their client for this transaction. The line item read, "Emergency expedited sale and filing fee." The invoice date was 24 hours before my flight to Halcyon Bay took off. This wasn't a response to a default. It was a premeditated action, timed to coincide with my known absence. They were not just facilitators, they were active participants. And who was their client? Who was the buyer? The name on the sale agreement was not a person. It was Hearthstone Investments, LLC. I ran the name through the state's corporate database. Hearthstone Investments had been registered just 3 months ago. It had one listed agent and a registered address. The address wasn't an office. It was a private mailbox at a pack-and-ship store in a strip mall 2 towns over. It was a classic shell corporation, designed to obscure the identity of the true owners, an anonymous vehicle for a fraudulent transaction. The final piece of the immediate puzzle was the lock change. Why would the buyer, not the bank, change the locks? In a legitimate foreclosure, the bank or the court seizes the property. Here, the sequence was broken. I had my team pull the work order from Rapid Bolt Security. The client who had commissioned and paid for the new lock installation was not Westbrook Mutual Bank. It was Hearthstone Investments, LLC. This was a critical error on their part. It legally separated the bank from the act of seizing my home and directly tied the shell company to the illegal eviction. They had created a clean, direct line of culpability from the entity that now owned my house to the physical act of barring me from it. The initial analysis was complete. I had the how and the who. It was time to act. I dialed the fraud department at Westbrook Mutual. This was not a call for a customer service representative. I used the direct line for corporate counsel. When a woman with a tired but sharp voice answered, I began. "My name is Rowan Blake. I am the owner of the property at 12 Sycamore Lane, which is the subject of mortgage account number 774B2. I am recording this call for quality assurance and legal documentation. Please confirm you are authorized to do the same." There was a pause. "Yes, this call is being recorded." "Excellent," I said, my voice level and cold. "I am formally notifying you that my account is in good standing and that any records indicating a payment delinquency are the result of a fraudulent third-party attack on your systems and my account. An unauthorized external account was added to my profile, and a fraudulent attempt was made to divert my mortgage payment, creating a false default pretext." I could hear her typing furiously. "Ma'am, our records show—" "Your records are wrong," I cut in, leaving no room for argument. "I am instructing you to place an immediate and total freeze on my account. No further changes, transfers, or communications are to be authorized without my explicit verbal and written consent. Furthermore, I require an immediate forensic audit of all digital activity related to my account for the past 30 days. I specifically need the IP logs. I repeat, the Internet Protocol logs, for the session that authorized the addition of the new beneficiary account and the session that initiated the failed transfer. I expect that data package to be sent to my legal counsel within the hour. We will have to investigate, she started. There is nothing to investigate, I said. There is only data to be pulled. Your institution has allowed a breach that facilitated grand larceny. Your liability in this matter is substantial. You will find that complying with my request is the most prudent course of action. The threat was not veiled. It was a clear statement of fact. Silence followed, then a quiet, "Understood. We will pull the logs." It took them 47 minutes. An encrypted file appeared in my inbox. I decrypted it and opened the log file. It was a string of numbers, meaningless to most, but to me, it was a confession. The IP address that had accessed my account, reset my password via the family email, added the new bank account, and modified the payment instruction, was 73.22.104.98. I ran it through a geolocation service. The result was instantaneous. The IP address was registered to a residential account with a major internet service provider. The subscriber address for that account was 1420 Stoneford Drive, my mother and Richard's house. The network name, broadcast for any device to see, was Blake Guest. The pieces didn't just fit. They snapped together with the force of a tectonic plate. It was a simple, elegant piece of fraud. Tessa, using the unsecured family Wi-Fi at our mother's house, had used a legacy email account to gain control of my bank profile. She created a manufactured default, she and her accomplices, hidden behind a shell LLC, then used that manufactured default to trigger an emergency sale with a complicit real estate agency, buying my house from under me for a fraction of its value. The goal was simple: get the title, then flip the house on the open market for a quick, massive profit. It was a short-selling scheme, but the asset wasn't a stock. It was my home, and the primary conspirator was my sister. The risk map in my head was now complete. Every node was confirmed, every pathway lit in bright, damning red. Hearthstone Investments, LLC. The name was bland, generic, designed to be forgotten. But a name is a data point, and every data point is a thread. Sitting in the quiet solitude of the hotel room, I fed the name into the Ashridge Analytics proprietary database. This wasn't Google. This was a deep web crawler and data aggregator, cross-referencing global corporate filings, legal proceedings, and financial crime watch lists. It was the system I helped design to find needles in haystacks of shell corporations. I typed the name and hit enter. The search was almost instantaneous. A single red flag appeared on the screen. It was a match. Hearthstone Investments, LLC, had appeared once before, 2 years ago. As a peripheral entity in a complex money laundering investigation, my firm had handled for a banking client. The case involved inflated real estate appraisals in a neighboring state. Hearthstone had been used as a pass-through entity to purchase a property with illicit funds, then immediately resell it to a legitimate buyer, effectively washing the money clean. The LLC was dissolved shortly after, but the name had been logged in our system. That they had resurrected the same name for this operation was sloppy. It was arrogant. It spoke of a belief that no one would ever be looking this closely. The archived file contained the original registration documents. I clicked open the PDF. There, under the title, Registered Agent, was the name, Mason Price. The name was vaguely familiar. I ran it through my own social media analysis tool, cross-referencing it with my sister's known associates. The connection snapped into place in seconds. Mason Price was Tessa's ex-boyfriend from a few years back. He was a charming, slightly feckless guy who had drifted from one sales job to another. Last I'd heard, selling high-premium life insurance policies. He didn't have the sophistication to structure a shell company. He was the front man, the disposable signature on the paperwork. Suddenly, a memory surfaced, sharp and clear. It was from a family dinner about 6 months ago. Tessa, swirling a glass of wine, had announced to the table with a smug air of importance, "I'm thinking of getting my real estate license soon. There's a lot of money to be made if you know how to move properties quickly." At the time, it seemed like another one of her fleeting ambitions. Now, it was a statement of intent. I finally understood why she wanted that license. It wasn't just to sell houses. It was to control the entire fraudulent transaction chain, from fake default to final sale. The business model crystallized in my mind, a perfect, ugly flowchart. Step 1. Use a compromised identity to manufacture a loan default on a target property owned by a distracted or absent individual. Step 2. Work with a complicit or negligent real estate agent to initiate an emergency sale at a below-market price. Step 3. Purchase the property using your own anonymous LLC. Step 4. Falsify repair invoices and levy bogus administrative fees against the property to inflate its cost basis, making the subsequent profit appear smaller for tax purposes. Step 5. Sell the house on the open market at its true value. The profit would be immense and almost entirely untraceable if done correctly. They had almost done it correctly. Their mistake was me. They had chosen the wrong target. Now, I had to force them out from behind their corporate veil. A direct legal challenge would be slow, mired in months of court filings. I needed leverage, and I needed it now. I decided to fight fire with finance. I would set a trap, and the bait would be the one thing I knew they couldn't resist: more easy money. Through a holding company completely firewalled from my personal identity, I owned several small, low-value rental properties in Willow Bend, a less affluent town about an hour away. They were insignificant assets, primarily held for tax purposes. One of them, a small 2-bedroom bungalow, was currently vacant. It would be my bait. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Evelyn Reed, drafted the offer overnight. We created a new, clean LLC for the transaction. Northwood Holdings Group. Northwood made a formal, unsolicited offer to Hearthstone Investments to purchase the Willow Bend bungalow. The offer was slightly above market value, just enough to be tempting, not enough to be suspicious. It was a simple, clean transaction, a quick flip for them. The real genius of the trap, however, was buried in the boilerplate of the purchase agreement. Evelyn had inserted 2 critical, non-negotiable clauses. The first was a standard source of funds audit clause, allowing us to verify that their capital was legitimate, a common anti-money laundering provision. The second was more potent, a full disclosure of related parties clause. It stipulated that prior to closing, the purchasing entity, Hearthstone, was required to provide a notarized document listing every member, manager, and shareholder with a stake of 5% or more in the company. It's a clause often used in high-value corporate real estate deals to prevent self-dealing and conflicts of interest. In a small residential sale like this, it was unusual, but it was not illegal, and it was presented as a non-negotiable part of Northwood's rigid corporate compliance policy. They could either agree to the terms or walk away from the easy money. I was betting on their greed. The offer was sent to Mason Price's registered agent address. 2 days passed. I spent the time coordinating with my team, monitoring their digital chatter, and preparing for the next phase. Then, on the 3rd day, my phone buzzed. It was an email from Mason. He had signed the initial letter of intent. He had taken the bait. Less than an hour later, a text message came through from a number I didn't recognize, but knew instantly was Tessa. The message was dripping with triumphant condescension. "Heard you're buying in Willow Bend now. Smart. You're going to lose both houses now." She thought I was scrambling, trying to buy a new, cheaper house after losing my dream home. She thought my offer to her shell company was some kind of bizarre coincidence. Her arrogance had made her blind. I stared at the message on my screen and felt a cold, calm smile touch my lips. I didn't reply. The full purchase agreement was sent to Mason. He signed it digitally within an hour. The moment the signed document hit my lawyer's secure server, we acted. Evelyn immediately sent a formal letter via courier and certified email to Mason Price, officially invoking Clause 14 taunt, B of the signed agreement, the related party disclosure. The letter legally required Hearthstone Investments, LLC, to provide the notarized list of all its members within 3 business days, or be in material breach of contract. The panic on their end must have been immediate. They were caught. To refuse was to void the contract and immediately signal that they were hiding something, a fact my lawyer would happily present to a judge. To comply was to expose themselves completely. They had no good options. They had signed a legal document, and I had just pulled the pin on the grenade hidden inside it. They waited until the last possible hour on the third day. A scanned PDF arrived in Evelyn's inbox. It was the notarized document. My hands were steady as I opened the file. There were 3 names listed. The first was Mason Price, holding a 20% stake. He was the disposable front. The second was Tessa Blake, holding a 60% stake. She was the architect, the majority owner, the one who stood to gain the most. And the third name made the breath catch in my throat. It was Sandra Pike, my mother, holding the remaining 20%. She wasn't just a victim of Tessa's manipulation or a passive, ignorant enabler. She was a shareholder, a knowing, willing partner in the scheme to defraud her own daughter, the mahogany box of family papers, the constant defense of Tessa, the pressure to sign the power of attorney. It all clicked into a new, sickening alignment. This was not a betrayal by a sister. It was a family conspiracy. The game had changed. This was no longer just a civil matter of fraudulent conveyance. This was wire fraud, conspiracy, and, with my mother's involvement, a clear-cut case of criminal conflict of interest and elder financial abuse. Only I was the target, not her. I leaned back in the hotel chair. The pieces of their broken scheme laid out before me, and I thought about the phone call I had made to Tessa a week before my trip. The call where I excitedly told her the closing date for my new house and the exact dates I'd be in Halcyon Bay. I had made the call from my office line. It was a recorded line, a fact all employees at my level were aware of. In the call, she had feigned sisterly happiness, but she had also asked pointed questions about my mortgage lender and the down payment, questions that, at the time, seemed nosy. Now, they sounded like intelligence gathering. I sent a request to my internal IT department. Pull the recording of my outbound call on September 28th to this number. I had the signatures, I had the IP logs, and now I had them on tape. The family game was over. The criminal case was about to begin. Monday morning at the Ashridge Analytics headquarters was a symphony of controlled energy, the hushed clicks of keyboards, the scent of expensive coffee, the floor-to-ceiling glass walls offering a panoramic view of the city. It was my native environment. I wore a tailored charcoal gray suit. My armor, my face was a neutral mask of professional composure. No one could have known that the case study I was about to present was carved from the raw, still bleeding wound of my own life. I stood at the head of the main boardroom. The audience consisted of the company's senior leadership, including our CEO, Marcus Thorne, a man who valued data above all else. The presentation on the 80-inch screen behind me was titled, Quarterly Threat Matrix Review, Emerging Vulnerabilities in Domestic Asset Security. Good morning, I began, my voice even and clear, resonating with the quiet authority they were used to. For this quarter's review, I want to move beyond our usual corporate threat models and analyze a new, highly effective form of fraud that targets a vulnerability we all share, our homes. I clicked the remote. The next slide appeared. At the top, in bold letters, it read, Case Study, The Westbrook Incident, Anonymized. This case involves a high-net-worth individual, a recent home purchase, and a coordinated attack by a multi-party criminal enterprise. The objective? Fraudulent property conveyance for the purpose of a short sale flip. A murmur went through the room. This wasn't about protecting corporate servers. This was personal. I had their complete attention. I moved to the next slide, the centerpiece of my presentation. It was a clean, elegant flowchart, the kind I designed every day to illustrate risk, but this one was a map of my own violation. The attack vector was multi-pronged, I explained, using a laser pointer to trace the lines. It began with social engineering to gain access to a legacy email account. This allowed the threat actors to compromise the target's primary banking credentials. A box labeled Legacy Email linked to another box labeled Bank Account Takeover. From there, they manufactured a payment default by rerouting a scheduled mortgage payment to a newly created beneficiary account, held by a shell LLC. The line moved from the bank account box to two new ones: Fraudulent Default and Shell LLC, Hearthstone Investments. This manufactured default was the pretext for an emergency sale, facilitated by a complicit real estate agency. A new line connected the default to a box labeled White Oak Realty. Simultaneously, the Shell LLC, acting as the illegitimate new owner, contracted a third-party vendor to forcibly change the locks, illegally evicting the rightful owner. The final line on the chart connected Hearthstone to a box labeled Rapid Bolt Security. I pointed the laser at the center of the diagram, where all lines converged on the Hearthstone box. The entire operation was orchestrated through a newly registered, anonymous limited liability company, using a registered agent with known ties to the primary conspirators. The IP address logs for the initial breach trace back to a single residential network, confirming the insider nature of the threat. I didn't show their names. I didn't have to. The methodology was what mattered. I had taken my family's grubby little crime and abstracted it into a clean, sterile, and terrifyingly replicable business model for theft. I had turned my sister into a PowerPoint slide. Marcus Thorne leaned forward, his elbows on the polished mahogany table. He stared at the flowchart. His eyes narrowed. He recognized the pattern, the cold logic of a systemic weakness. "This is a sophisticated model," he said, his voice quiet but carrying across the room. "It weaponizes our own financial and legal systems against us. How many people in our community are vulnerable to this?" "Anyone with a mortgage and a forgotten digital footprint," I replied. "Anyone who believes a family connection is a substitute for proper security protocols." Marcus nodded slowly, a decision forming behind his eyes. "This isn't just a case study. Rowan, this is a public service announcement. I want you to draft a security advisory based on this model. Generalize the recommendations. We'll distribute it to the entire Westbrook Ridge Community Association. Let's make our neighborhood a hard target." He turned to our general counsel. "And I want our legal department to look into offering pro bono consultations for residents who believe they've been targeted by similar schemes. We can launch it as a pilot program. Ashridge Gives Back." It was more than I could have hoped for. He wasn't just approving my actions. He was allocating the full weight of the company's resources and reputation to my cause. I was no longer an individual fighting a private battle. I was the head of a corporate task force defending an entire community. "I can have a draft of the advisory ready by noon," I said, "and I will coordinate with legal to structure the pilot program immediately." By 3 o'clock that afternoon, the Ashridge Analytics Home Security Defense Kit went live. It was a beautifully designed, user-friendly PDF, published on a public-facing section of our corporate website. It included a checklist for securing bank accounts, a guide on how to request and read your own IP access logs, an explanation of how shell companies work, and a list of red flags for spotting predatory real estate practices. Our PR department sent a press release to local news outlets and pushed the link to every community social media group in the county. The download counter on the webpage began to climb, first by dozens, then by hundreds. The first tremor from the blast wave hit my phone an hour later. It was a photo from Mrs. Gable, my neighbor. It showed two men hastily peeling the vinyl White Oak Realty logos off the side of the box truck that was still parked near my house. They were trying to erase their presence, to disappear. They could smell the storm coming. The second tremor was a text from Tessa. "What are you doing? This is everywhere. You're taking this too far." I looked at her message, at the frantic, panicked words of a petty criminal who had just realized she'd tried to rob a fortress with a crowbar. I typed my reply, my thumb steady. "I'm just teaching a class." The final, and most important, impact of the day came via an encrypted email from the legal department of Westbrook Mutual Bank. It was a formal, multi-page letter. It began with a profound apology for the lapse in security protocols. It went on to confirm that their internal investigation, prompted by my inquiry, had confirmed unauthorized access to my account originating from the IP address I had identified. They acknowledged that the payment default was illegitimate and had been expunged from my record. My account status was restored to current and in good standing. They concluded by stating that a formal notification was being sent to all 3 major credit bureaus to correct the erroneous delinquency report. It was a complete capitulation. They were terrified of the legal and reputational damage. My public campaign, backed by the formidable name of Ashridge Analytics, had turned me from a complaining customer into a major corporate threat. I read the email twice, then forwarded it to my lawyer with a single instruction. I need this in the form of a notarized affidavit, signed by a senior vice president. An email is a record, a sworn legal document is a weapon. By the end of the day, I had everything I needed. The bank had officially invalidated their entire claim. My company had unknowingly launched a public relations campaign against my enemies, and I held in my possession a digital file that was the equivalent of a signed confession from the bank, a legal shield that made any claim against my ownership of the house completely void. I had neutralized the board, fortified my position, and deployed my heavy artillery. The first phase of the operation was complete. Now, I could move on to phase 2, the direct engagement with the hostiles. The coffee shop in Willow Bend was called The Daily Grind. It was a painfully generic place, smelling of burnt coffee and cinnamon muffins, filled with the low murmur of midday chatter. The banality of the setting was a strategic choice. High-stakes conversations are best had in low-stakes environments. There are no exits, no places to hide, just the uncomfortable intimacy of a small table and 2 cups of cooling coffee. I was there first. I chose a booth in the back corner, away from the windows. On the table in front of me, I placed 3 identical, crisp manila envelopes, side by side, perfectly aligned with the edge of the table. They sat there like landmines in a field of linoleum. Mason Price arrived 10 minutes late, a swagger in his step that was entirely unearned. He wore a sports coat that was a size too tight and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He still had the look of a man who believed his charm was a universal currency. He slid into the booth opposite me. "Rowan, to what do I owe the pleasure?" he asked, trying for a tone of breezy confidence. "Tessa didn't mention you wanted to chat." I didn't smile. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. My job is to de-escalate corporate crises, and the first step is always to establish the factual baseline, to strip away the narrative and present the cold, hard data. "This isn't a chat, Mason," I said, my voice low and even. I slid the first envelope across the table. It stopped perfectly in front of him. "This is a debriefing. Open it." His smile faltered. He hesitated, then picked up the envelope as if it might be hot to the touch. He pulled out the single sheet of paper inside. It was a printout of the IP access log from my bank, showing the date, time, and the address at 1420 Stoneford Drive. Below it was a high-resolution image of the forged Rowan B. signature from the default notice, with a forensic analysis report highlighting the uniform pressure and digital artifacts of a printed image. I watched him as he read. The blood drained from his face, leaving a pasty, gray pallor. A fine sheen of sweat appeared on his forehead. The charming salesman vanished, replaced by a cornered animal. I don't know what this is," he stammered, his eyes darting around the coffee shop. "You do," I said calmly. I pushed the second envelope toward him. "So let's add some context." He opened it with trembling fingers. This one contained 2 documents. The first was a copy of the full disclosure of related parties clause from the Northwood Holdings purchase agreement he had signed. The second was a printout of an email, forwarded to me by a confidential source. It was from Tessa to a wedding venue coordinator, sent a month ago. In it, she referred to Mason multiple times. The phrase I had highlighted in yellow was, "My fiancé, Mason Price, will handle the deposit." His eyes locked on the word fiancé. He understood immediately. I had legally bound him to Tessa as a direct financial partner, not just a casual associate. His claim of being a simple, uninvolved agent was now gone. He was a co-conspirator, a principal in a criminal enterprise with the woman the law would now see as his betrothed. "She told me this was all above board," he whispered, his voice cracking. "A simple investment." "There's nothing simple about this," I said, and pushed the third and final envelope across the table. "This last one is your future." He looked at it but didn't touch it. He was afraid of what was inside. "It's a summons to a civil hearing," I explained, my voice as neutral as if I were reading a weather report. "It details charges of conspiracy, wire fraud, and fraudulent conveyance. My lawyers are filing it this afternoon. They have also prepared a complete file, including everything you have in front of you, to be delivered to the county district attorney's office. They are particularly interested in cases that fit the pattern of racketeering." The word hung in the air between us. Racketeering, a word that transforms a simple property dispute into a serious organized crime investigation. I reached into my bag and took out my laptop. I opened it, and without a word, plugged in a small, black USB drive. I clicked a single audio file. The sound that filled the small space of our booth was Tessa's voice, clear and bright, captured on the recorded line from my office phone. "So the closing went through? You actually got the house?" a friend's voice asked on the other end of the line. And then Tessa, laughing, triumphant. "Got it? Honey, I sold it out from under her before she even knew what was happening. By the time her plane lands, my guy will be changing the locks. She'll be homeless. It's perfect." Mason recoiled as if he'd been physically struck. He stared at the laptop, then at me, his mouth agape. He grabbed his cup of coffee, but his hand was shaking so badly that he spilled it, the hot liquid splashing across the table. He sputtered, coffee dribbling down his chin. "Tessa said. She said it was all in Sandra's name. She said her mom was taking the lead, that I was just the agent, that I was completely firewalled," he blurted out, the words tumbling out in a desperate, panicked rush. He was offering them up, his co-conspirators, as a sacrifice. It was exactly what I'd expected. I closed the laptop. The sound of Tessa's gloating cut off. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "There is one way out for you, Mason," I said. "A very narrow door, and it is closing very fast." I laid out the terms, not as a negotiation, but as an instruction. 1. You will wire transfer the full amount you paid for my house, plus all associated fees, back to an account I designate. 2. You will sign a full rescission of the sale, nullifying the transaction completely and restoring the title to my name. 3. You will sign a legally binding confession, a sworn affidavit detailing the entire scheme, who was involved, and how it was executed. You will do all of this right now." He stared at me, his mind racing, looking for another angle, another escape. He found none. "If you do this," I continued, "the third envelope disappears. The DA's office never gets the file with your name in it. You become a cooperating witness, not a defendant. Tessa and my mother can deal with the fallout. You just walk away, poorer, but free. You have 60 seconds to decide." He didn't need 60. He nodded, a series of frantic, jerky movements. "Okay, yes, okay." I slid a pre-printed document and a pen across the table. It was the rescission agreement and the affidavit, drafted by my lawyer that morning. He didn't even read them. He just signed, his signature a desperate scrawl. As he was signing the last page, I took out my phone. I dialed the number for Rapid Bolt Security. "This is Rowan Blake," I said when the dispatcher answered. "I am the legal owner of 12 Sycamore Lane. My property was illegally accessed earlier this week. I need a technician to come to the address immediately to replace all external locks. The service is to be billed to the account of Hearthstone Investments. I'm emailing you the signed authorization from their registered agent and the official letter from my bank confirming ownership right now." The plan was in motion. Mason wired the money from his phone, his face pale and slick with sweat. I confirmed receipt. He was free to go. He practically ran out of the coffee shop, a man who had just traded a prison sentence for a financial loss. I arrived at my house 30 minutes later. The rapid bolt technician, a different one this time, was already there. His truck parked in the driveway. He was examining the front door when a white convertible screeched to a halt at the curb. Tessa stormed out of the car, her face a mask of fury. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she shrieked at the technician. "Get away from this door! You have no right to be here. I will have you arrested for trespassing." The technician, a large, unflappable man, simply looked at her, then at me as I walked up the lawn. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I held up 2 documents. "This," I said, holding up the first one, "is a sworn affidavit from Westbrook Mutual Bank, confirming that I am the owner of this property and that any claim of default was fraudulent and has been officially expunged." Then I held up the second document, the one Mason had just signed. "And this is a legally binding rescission of sale, signed and executed by the registered agent of Hearthstone Investments, nullifying their purchase and returning the title to me, effective immediately." I looked directly at my sister. "You have no authority here. Tessa, the people you paid to take my house have just given it back." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The rage in her eyes flickered, replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding. Her power, built on lies and manipulation, had just collided with a wall of notarized, legally binding fact. In the face of those documents, her anger was meaningless. Her voice was gone. All her rights were gone. The only sound was the sharp, metallic whir of the locksmith's drill as he began to remove the lock she had put on my door. The Sunday dinner at Stoneford was a family institution, a carefully staged production of upper-middle-class harmony. I hadn't attended one in over a year, but my mother's invitation, delivered via a saccharine voicemail, had been insistent. "Just a quiet family meal, Rowan. It's time we put all this unpleasantness behind us." It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons to a peace negotiation where they assumed I would be the one to surrender. I walked into the house, my house, the one my father built his dreams in before Richard Pike and his leather-bound law books filled every corner. The dining room was set for a feast. The long mahogany table, polished to a mirror shine, reflected the warm glow of the chandelier. A golden-skinned roast chicken, fragrant with rosemary and lemon, sat on a platter at the center, flanked by bowls of garlic mashed potatoes and green beans almondine. It was a perfect picture of domestic tranquility. My stepfather, Richard, stood to pour me a glass of wine, his movements stiff and formal. Tessa was already seated, a smug, self-satisfied look on her face. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater, the picture of innocence. My mother, Sandra, bustled in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. She smiled, a bright, brittle thing that didn't reach her eyes. "Rowan, darling, I'm so glad you came," she said, kissing the air beside my cheek. "I just know that once we all sit down and talk, we can clear up this entire misunderstanding." Misunderstanding. The word was a carefully chosen anesthetic, meant to numb the reality of what they had done. I took my seat. The chair was heavy. The white linen napkin felt like starched paper. For a few minutes, we played the game. We passed the bowls. We commented on the food. Richard talked about a case he was working on. My mother asked about my flight home from Halcyon Bay. It was a masterful performance of denial. Tessa was the one to finally break the fragile ceasefire. She raised her wine glass, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. "I'd like to make a toast," she announced, her eyes finding mine across the table. "To family, because no matter what happens, family is always family. We forgive, and we move on, together." The sentiment was so grotesquely hypocritical it was almost admirable. Richard and Sandra raised their glasses in solemn agreement. I did not. Instead, I reached down to the leather briefcase by my chair. I pulled out a thick manila folder and, with a quiet, deliberate motion, placed it on the table beside Tessa's bread plate. The sound of the heavy paper hitting the polished wood was unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. "What's that?" Richard asked, his lawyerly instincts on high alert. I ignored him. I reached back into my briefcase and took out a small, sleek Bluetooth speaker, no bigger than a deck of cards. I placed it in the center of the table and pressed the power button. A soft blue light pulsed to life. "Before we move on," I said, my voice calm and even, "I think it's important to have a clear and accurate record of the events we are moving on from." I tapped my phone. Tessa's own voice filled the room, amplified by the small speaker. It was the recording from my office line, crisp and clear. I sold it out from under her before she even knew what was happening. By the time her plane lands, my guy will be changing the locks. She'll be homeless. It's perfect. The silence that followed was absolute. The clinking of silverware, the low hum of the refrigerator, it all vanished. Tessa was frozen, her wine glass halfway to her lips, her face a mask of disbelief. Richard's eyes narrowed, the legal implications of a recorded admission of intent flashing through his mind. My mother's brittle smile finally shattered. She stood up so abruptly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Rowan, that's enough. Turn that off. This is cruel. I just wanted to ensure you were stable, that the house was secure." I met her gaze across the table, my expression unmoving. "The house was perfectly secure," I said, my voice cutting through her panicked excuses. "And you didn't just want me to be stable, Mom. You wanted a return on your investment. You were a 20% shareholder in Hearthstone Investments, LLC. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the dispassionate finality of a coroner's report." Sandra swayed slightly, gripping the back of her chair for support. She opened her mouth, but only a small, sputtering sound came out. Tessa, recovering from the initial shock, immediately launched her counteroffensive. "That's a lie," she snapped, pointing a trembling finger at me. "This was all Mason's doing. He was the agent. He set up the company. He must have put our names on the paperwork without telling us. We're the victims here." "Are you?" I asked, my voice still quiet. I opened the folder on the table. "Because Mason Price doesn't seem to agree with your version of events." I slid a document across the table. It was the first page of his sworn affidavit. His signature was at the bottom, bold and clear. He signed a full, detailed confession this afternoon. He explained the entire scheme, how you came to him with the idea, how Sandra provided the initial capital, and how he was instructed to act as the front man. It's all in there. He's a cooperating witness now. He chose to save himself. The last of Tessa's defenses crumbled. There was no one left to blame. The trap had closed. I let the weight of that reality settle in the room for a long moment. Then I spoke again, my tone softening slightly, shifting from prosecutor to risk manager. "I have no interest in seeing anyone in this room go to prison," I said gently. The words were a lifeline, and I saw both of them grasp at it. "I don't want to see the family name dragged through a criminal court. I don't want to answer reporters' questions, but my desire for privacy is conditional." I paused. "It's conditional on your complete and total cooperation, starting right now." From the folder, I produced a final document. It was a settlement agreement, drafted by my lawyer. I placed it in the center of the table, next to the speaker. "These are my terms," I said. "They are not negotiable. First, you will provide full financial restitution for all costs I have incurred as a result of your actions. This includes my legal fees, the cost of the locksmiths, my hotel expenses, and a penalty for the fraudulent use of my credit. The total is on page 1. Second, you will both sign a formal, notarized letter of apology, the text of which is attached as Appendix A. And third, you will sign a legally binding covenant that prohibits you from ever again inquiring about, accessing, interfering with, or acting as an agent for any of my financial, real, or intellectual property assets. It is, for all intents and purposes, a financial restraining order. You will agree to these terms, or the affidavit from Mason Price, along with this recording, will be on the district attorney's desk at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning." Tessa stared at the document, her chest rising and falling rapidly. All the years of resentment, of being the second best, of coveting what I had, boiled over in a final, futile act of defiance. She snatched the pen lying next to the agreement and threw it across the table. It clattered against a wine glass. "You wouldn't dare," she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "You wouldn't dare destroy your own family." I looked at her, at the sister who had tried to leave me homeless, and felt nothing but a profound, weary calm. "I dared to get a scholarship when Dad's life insurance ran out," I said, my voice steady and quiet. "I dared to work 3 jobs to get through business school. I dared to move to a new city alone. I dared to build a career from nothing. I dared to buy that house with my own money, free and clear of any of you." I leaned forward slightly. "You're the one who tried to destroy something. I'm just cleaning up the mess." A heavy silence descended. The argument was over. The only thing left was the outcome. Richard, my stepfather, let out a long, slow sigh. He was a man who understood contracts, who understood leverage. He knew a checkmate when he saw one. He picked up the pen from where it had fallen, uncapped it, and pulled the agreement toward him. Without a word, he signed his name as a witness on the signature lines for both his wife and his stepdaughter. He had surrendered on their behalf. Tessa watched him, her face a storm of conflicting emotions. She looked at our mother, who was now weeping silently into her napkin, a broken woman stripped of her authority and her excuses. There was no help coming. There was no escape route left. With a final, shuddering breath of fury and defeat, Tessa snatched the agreement. Her hand was shaking as she signed her name, the letters sharp and angry. The family dinner was over. The roast chicken sat untouched, growing cold. The only sound in the perfectly appointed dining room was the quiet, final scratch of a pen sealing the terms of a surrender. The settlement agreement was signed, the restitution payment was scheduled, and the hollow performance of family was over. But the battle I had fought was merely a tactical response to a breach. The true victory lay in the strategy I had deployed long before the war ever began. The final move was not an attack, but a revelation. Back in my own house, the air felt different. The scent of stale, unfamiliar bodies was gone, replaced by the clean, neutral smell of home. The new locks on the doors felt solid and secure under my hand. In my study, a room defined by order and quiet calculation, I knelt before a small, fireproof safe concealed behind a panel of bookshelves. I entered the code, and the heavy steel door swung open. Inside, nestled amongst my passport and a few pieces of heirloom jewelry, was a single, notarized document. I pulled it out. The paper was thick, official. The title at the top read, "Quitclaim Deed." It was dated 4 months ago. The document was simple but legally unbreachable. It recorded the transfer of the property at 12 Sycamore Lane from Rowan Blake, an unmarried woman, to Rowan Blake, trustee of the Blue Finch Trust. It had been signed, sealed, and legally witnessed months before Tessa and my mother had even begun to lay their plans. This was my real fortress. While the public-facing county tax records still listed my name for privacy and simplicity, the true, beneficial ownership of my home had been transferred into the protective custody of my irrevocable trust the day I closed on the property. Think of it as a legal bomb shelter for my most significant asset. A trust is a separate entity, a legal fortress with its own set of rules, and the most important rule of the Blue Finch Trust was that its assets could not be touched by the grubby hands of my relations. The flimsy, old power of attorney they might have tried to use, or any new one they could have forged, was completely useless. You cannot use a personal key to open a corporate vault. Their entire scheme was predicated on attacking Rowan Blake, the individual, but the individual had already handed the keys to the castle over to an impenetrable legal entity. I had deliberately held back on filing the deed with the county recorder's office. An unrecorded deed is still legally valid between the parties involved, but recording it makes it public knowledge. It puts the world on notice. By keeping it private, I had left the bait in the trap. I allowed the public records to show a vulnerability that, in reality, did not exist. It was the ultimate honeypot. They saw an open door, not realizing it was the entrance to a cage. Now it was time to lock the door behind them. I scanned the document and emailed it to my lawyer. Evelyn. The subject line was a single word: execute. Her reply came minutes later. Filing electronically with the recorder's office now. Once the filing is time-stamped, any subsequent claim on the property, fraudulent or otherwise, is rendered legally null and void from its inception. It's not just that they lose, it's that, legally speaking, they were never even in the game. The public filing was the checkmate they never saw coming. It wasn't just a reversal of their fraudulent transaction, it was the legal obliteration of it. It proved that Hearthstone Investments had purchased a property from a seller, me, the individual, who legally had no right to sell it. The transaction was a ghost, a legal fiction. The notification from the county, a routine digital alert of a change in property status, must have gone to Tessa as the last interested party on record. My phone rang less than an hour later. It was her. Her voice was thin, confused, laced with a new kind of fear, the fear of a chess player who has just had the board flipped over to reveal a completely different game being played underneath. "What did you do?" she stammered, the word deed catching in her throat. "The county just sent an alert, a transfer, dated from months ago. What is this?" I leaned back in my office chair, looking out the window at the quiet, tree-lined street that was, and always had been, mine. "That's the firewall." "Tessa," I said, my voice calm, almost instructive. "The house was never vulnerable. The asset was secured in the Bluefinch Trust the day I bought it." You tricked us," she whispered, the accusation weak, pathetic. A small, genuine smile touched my lips. It was not a smile of malice, but of professional satisfaction. The system had worked. "No," I corrected her gently. "I didn't trick you. I just wrote a new set of terms and conditions, the kind you never bothered to read." I could almost hear her mind racing, trying to find a foothold in the crumbling edifice of her plan. "But the family papers, the POA." "Irrelevant," I said. "And since we're on the subject of terms and conditions," I swiveled my chair to face my laptop. I pulled up another document from the trust's files and shared my screen with her via a secure link. "Do you remember last Christmas, when you and Mom witnessed my signature on some boring investment paperwork for my portfolio?" On her screen, a page from the trust amendment appeared. I had highlighted a specific clause. Section 9, subsection C. Prohibition on related parties. It explicitly forbade any immediate family member, by blood or marriage, from acting as an agent, beneficiary, or transacting party for any asset held within the trust. Their own signatures were clearly visible at the bottom of the page, under the heading, "Witnessed and Agreed." I had told them it was a routine document needed by my investment firm. They had signed without reading, eager to get back to the holiday party. Tessa was silent. She finally understood. She hadn't just been outmaneuvered in the present. She had been legally neutralized by her own hand, over a year ago. The denouement was swift and quiet. The next morning, the same Rapid Bolt security truck pulled up. This time, the technician was smiling sheepishly. He handed me a corrected invoice. The bill for both his visits was addressed to Hearthstone Investments, LLC, COO, Mason Price. "Looks like we got hired by the wrong people the first time," he said with a chuckle. "Sorry for the trouble, ma'am." I sent a short, polite message to the Westbrook Ridge Neighborhood email group. "Dear neighbors, thank you for your concern over the past few days. The administrative issue regarding my property has been fully resolved. It appears to have been a case of aggressive and potentially fraudulent real estate practices. For your own protection, my firm has prepared a complimentary guide on defending against such schemes." I attached the PDF of the Home Security Defense Kit. My personal problem had been successfully transformed into a community service. I was not the victim, I was the expert. Later that afternoon, I walked out onto my lawn. The grass was still trampled in places, but it would recover. I bent down, gripped the cold metal post of the sold sign, and pulled. It came out of the soft earth with a satisfying schlorp. The patch of lawn where it had stood looked clean, unburdened. The wound was gone. I carried the sign into the garage, I didn't throw it away. I took a length of wire and hung it on the wall, right next to the sleek, black carry-on suitcase I had brought back from Halcyon Bay. It wasn't a reminder of a violation. It was a trophy, a souvenir from a successful operation, a case study in risk mitigation, where the primary threat had been identified, contained, and neutralized. The house was silent. It was a deep, resonant quiet that soaked into the walls, a stark contrast to the hollow silence of an empty building. This was the sound of a home at rest. I sat at the quartz island in my kitchen, the only light coming from the cool, white glow of my laptop screen. Outside, the streetlights of Westbrook Ridge cast long shadows through the trees. Inside, there was only the gentle hum of the dishwasher, a rhythmic, soothing sound of order being restored. My fingers rested on the keyboard. On the screen was a new, blank document. I typed the title, Westbrook Incident Report, Personal Debrief and Lessons Learned. This was a habit ingrained by my profession. After every major event, every crisis contained, every system restored, we write the report. It is not an act of memory, but of integration. It is how you process the data, codify the lessons, and ensure the same vulnerability can never be exploited again. It is how you turn chaos into a teachable moment. This one was for an audience of one. I began to type, not a narrative, but a series of analytical points. It was the only way I knew how to make sense of the tangled wreckage of what had happened. Section 1. Threat Analysis. The primacy of the insider threat. The greatest danger to any secure system, whether it is a corporate network or a family, does not come from the outside. It comes from the trusted user with legitimate credentials, the foreign agent, the corporate spy, the disgruntled employee. These are the archetypes. But the most effective insider threat is the one you would never suspect, the one whose access is granted not by a keycard, but by shared blood and history. Tessa was not a hacker who had to breach a firewall. She was a user who already had the guest password. She knew my habits, my blind spots, my old email addresses. She knew which emotional levers to pull to distract and disable. The betrayal of a stranger is a risk. The betrayal of family is a catastrophic system failure. Section 2. Legal Instrument Analysis. Power of Attorney versus Bonds of Kinship. In a functioning system, trust is an efficiency. It allows for faster transactions, for the delegation of tasks, for a shared sense of purpose. In my family, trust was weaponized. It was used as a synonym for unquestioning compliance. A power of attorney, in their worldview, was not a legal document with sharply defined limits. It was a symbol of that compliance, a token of affection. To question it was to be cold, to be difficult, to be not a good daughter. They failed to understand that legal instruments are the opposite of sentiment. They exist precisely for the moments when sentiment fails. They are the firewalls between emotion and assets. The greatest lesson here is that you must never allow the language of kinship to overwrite the clear, cold language of the law. They are two different operating systems, and they are not compatible. Section 3. Defensive Systems Analysis. The Moral Utility of the Irrevocable Trust. For a long time, I viewed the Blue Finch Trust as a sad necessity, a concession to the dysfunction of my family, a sign that I had to build walls where others had opened doors. I see now that I was wrong. A trust is not an act of cynicism. It is an act of profound realism. It is not built to hide love or affection from those who are worthy of it. It is built to shield your life's work from those who would exploit that love for their own gain. It is a quiet, legal declaration that your peace, your security, and your future are not communal property to be debated at a dinner table. It is a system designed to protect you not from the world, but from a very specific and often very close segment of it. It doesn't conceal love. It only conceals assets from malice. I stopped typing and pushed the laptop away slightly. My neck was stiff. I stood and walked to the counter, my bare feet silent on the cool oak floors. I filled the electric kettle with water, the simple, mechanical act a comfort. As it heated, I listened to the sounds of the house, the soft swoosh of the dishwasher changing cycles, the faint click of the thermostat as the heat kicked on. It was the house breathing. It was the sound of normalcy, a normalcy I had built, defended, and reclaimed. The kettle clicked off. I poured the steaming water over a bag of black tea in my favorite mug, the one I had bought on a trip to London years ago. I let it steep, watching the dark color bleed into the water, a slow, controlled infusion. With the warm mug in my hands, I returned to the island. I sat down and pulled the laptop closer. My fingers warmed by the ceramic. I opened my email. The inbox, which had been a battlefield for days, was now quiet. There were only a few messages that required my attention. The first was from the senior vice president of Westbrook Mutual Bank. The subject line was, "Formal apology and confirmation of credit file correction." I opened it. It was a long, jargon-filled letter, but the core message was clear. They were sorry. They were compliant. They were terrified. They had attached the notarized affidavit my lawyer had demanded. I dragged the file into a folder labeled Westbrook Closed. The second email was from Mason Price. It was a short, terse message confirming the wire transfer of the restitution funds was scheduled for the following morning. It included a groveling offer to provide any further testimony I might require. I typed a one-line reply. Compliance with the agreed-upon schedule is all that is required. I hit send. He was a loose end, now neatly tied off. Finally, out of a clinical curiosity, I opened a social media tab. I checked Tessa's profile. It was silent. No posts, no stories, no updates, a complete digital retreat. My mother's profile was different. She had posted a new photo an hour ago. It was a brightly lit, perfectly framed picture of the late blooming roses in her garden. It was a picture of defiant normalcy, a desperate attempt to project a world in which nothing was wrong. The caption was a single, cheerful word, autumn. The comments were turned off. I closed the browser tab. The performance was not for me. It was for her audience, her circle of friends who needed to believe in the fiction of the perfect family in the perfect house in Stoneford. I looked back at the report I had written. The 3 sections stood as a monument to the last 2 weeks of my life, a cold, clear analysis of a deeply personal war. I read it one last time, nodding slowly. The lessons were learned, the data was processed, the incident was over. My cursor hovered over the save button. I navigated to the root directory of my personal files. There were folders for work, finances, travel. I created a new one. I typed its name, home. I moved the Westbrook incident report into the folder. I clicked the mouse, the file saved, the case was closed, and this time it was in its proper place. I stood at my own front door, the cool night air raising goosebumps on my arms. The porch light cast a warm, golden circle on the newly installed hardware. It wasn't the cheap, scratched brass of the lock Tessa had ordered. This was a high-security deadbolt, brushed nickel, the same finish as the handles I had originally chosen. It felt cool and solid under my fingertips. The new key, sitting heavy and solid in my palm, slid into the lock with a satisfying, precision-engineered click. It was the sound of a system restored to its factory settings. This wasn't just a lock. It was a statement, a perimeter re-established. Inside, the house was mine again. I walked through the quiet rooms, my footsteps echoing slightly in the stillness. On the clean, uncluttered surface of the dining table, 3 stacks of paper lay in a neat row. They were the spoils of a war fought not with weapons, but with clauses and consequences. The first was the signed restitution agreement, complete with the wire transfer confirmation from Mason. The second was the notarized letter of apology, its text a masterpiece of humiliating legalese drafted by my lawyer, signed by both Tessa and my mother. The third, and most important, was the covenant, the financial restraining order that legally severed them from my life's work. A single, heavy gold clip held them all together, a small, gleaming emblem of victory. I sat at the table, a place meant for sharing meals, and performed one last administrative task. I photographed each page with my phone, the crisp digital images appearing one by one on the screen. I composed a new email to my lawyer. Evelyn. The subject was simple. Westbrook. Final documentation. I attached the images. The body of the email was even simpler. For your records, thank you for your counsel. I hit send. The digital files flew through the ether. A permanent record stored on a secure server. A final piece of insurance. Then, I took the physical papers and slid them into a thick brown clasp envelope. I picked up a black marker, in firm, clear letters, the same way I would close a multi-million-dollar corporate file. I wrote 2 words on the front. Case closed. I placed the envelope not in my personal safe, but in my briefcase. It was a work product, and it belonged with the tools of my trade. I walked to the large picture window in the living room and looked out into the darkness. A gentle wind was blowing, rustling the leaves of the old oak trees that lined Sycamore Street. The world outside was unchanged, oblivious to the quiet, brutal war that had been fought and won within these walls. My gaze drifted toward the garage. I could picture the red "Sold" sign hanging on the wall inside, inert and powerless. It was no longer a symbol of my violation. It was a prop from a play that had finished its run, a piece of set dressing from a story that was now over. Its role was complete. One by one, I moved through the house, turning off the lights, the click of the switch in the entryway, the soft dimming of the lamps in the living room, the darkness that fell over the dining room table where the surrender had been signed just days before. With each light that went out, the house seemed to settle deeper into the foundation, to grow heavier, more permanent. It felt as if the entire structure was breathing a long, slow sigh of relief. The tension of the last 2 weeks finally bleeding out of its walls. As I stood in the semi-darkness of the hallway, my phone, which had been a weapon for days, buzzed on the console table. I picked it up. A single text message glowed on the screen. It was from Tessa, her last shot, her final, pathetic attempt to frame this as a contest she had simply lost. The message had 2 words: "You won." I stood there for a long moment, the phone's light illuminating my face. She still didn't understand. She never would. This was never a game to be won. It was a system breach to be contained, a hostile takeover to be repelled, a home to be reclaimed. My victory wasn't in her defeat. It was in the quiet, peaceful darkness that now surrounded me. I typed my reply, my last communication, the final closing of the file. I just came home. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked the last few feet to the front door. I reached out and turned the deadbolt. The sound was not loud, but it filled the entire house, a dry, mechanical, and utterly final thunk as the heavy bolt slid into the reinforced strike plate. Everything locked down, every vulnerability sealed, every clause executed. The door was closed. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and let's connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this, I'd be so grateful if you would subscribe to the channel, like this video, and consider hitting the hype button to help this story reach more listeners.